For more on Ukraine and the day's top political stories, let's bring in Ed O'Keefe and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Ed is CBS's senior White House and political correspondent, and Caitlin is a CBS News political reporter. Ed, let's start with you. What can you tell us about what the White House is doing to get Congress to pass more military assistance for Ukraine finally?
Well, for one thing, he signed a bill this afternoon called the Ukraine Defense Lend-Lease Act, which is essentially going to make it easier for the United States to quickly put together a bunch of military equipment and send it off to Ukraine as needed. In essence, a more symbolic move, but one designed to streamline and accelerate getting aid to that country. But he's looking for more money now, and we hear from Capitol Hill that about $40 billion worth is being put together by Democrats in legislation that could be passed later this week. The White House a little while ago issuing a statement from the president saying he's glad to hear that there appears to be strong support for the proposal that he submitted, and that Congress is likely to pass it in substantially the form I proposed. In fact, they're probably going to add a little more money to it for additional food and military aid to Ukraine. But he adds later, as vital as it is to help Ukraine combat Russian aggression, it is equally vital to help Americans combat COVID. Without timely COVID funding, more Americans will die needlessly. That is a nod to the fact that the White House is hoping, now that House and Senate are in session together again at the same time through Memorial Day, that you would see lawmakers quickly pass legislation dealing with the two dual challenges the world is facing, the war in Ukraine and the ongoing pandemic. The problem is there remains big Republican opposition to more money for COVID funding unless or until there's also a vote on what's called Title 42, that pandemic-era public health order that allows immigration authorities along the U.S.-Mexico border to immediately or very quickly deport people who try to cross the border for public health reasons. Republicans want to see it kept in place. Some moderate Democrats do as well, unless or until the administration comes up with what they would consider, what lawmakers that are concerned would consider, a more detailed plan to deal with this if it's lifted. The White House knows that can't necessarily pass or be something that the president would sign. So he's saying, get the Ukraine money to me quickly, then go work on the COVID funding, which is going to involve a fight over what is, in essence, it's basically a proxy fight, Scott, on immigration policy.
Meanwhile, Congress will have an abortion debate as all this unfolds. A new CBS News polling finds 64% of Americans believe the Supreme Court should keep Roe versus Wade, while 36% want to overturn it. Appearing on Face the Nation Sunday, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi talked about the significance of federally protected abortion rights being threatened.
Something so serious and so personal and so disrespectful of women. Here we are on Mother's Day, a week where the court has slapped women in the face in terms of disrespect for their judgment about the size and timing of their families.
Pretty seminal moment for Congress coming this week. So, Ed, what's the White House saying about abortion right now?
They say that that bill should be passed. It would be a bill to codify federal abortion rights into law. As we've discussed on this program and at other times across the streaming network, there isn't support for that right now. But the president's continuing to put his muscle behind it, believing that it should be passed. Beyond that, the White House says they're continuing to look at all sorts of different executive or sort of policy steps they could take if or when Roe is completely struck down by the court later this year as now anticipated. Is there something the Justice Department can do to provide protections for women who are perhaps trying to cross state lines to go get one, or who may need to consult with doctors over telemedicine instead of going in person, if states start to put in restrictions like that? Are there going to be a need to shore up gay rights or privacy rights or some other issue that has been tied through the years through legal means to the original Roe ruling? That is a concern that the White House has and is exploring. There's what they call a Gender Policy Council, which is one of those things that cuts across several different departments and here at the White House, looking at concerns of women's rights and related issues, that's been in existence essentially since last fall to prepare for this possibility. What they might do, how it would be enacted is unclear. But beyond that, this White House agrees with congressional Democrats that the easiest, safest way to restore or sustain federal abortion rights is to pass it into law, something for which ultimately right now not enough votes exist in the Senate.
So because there are no votes for this, or no 60 votes for this, Caitlin, why are the Democrats pursuing this vote on the Women's Health Protection Act?
Yeah, that's right. They don't even have 50 votes for this. When they put this up for a vote earlier this year, Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, voted with Republicans against bringing this up for a debate on the floor. So it doesn't even have enough votes to overcome a filibuster, but it doesn't have enough support to pass it outright. Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey is opposed to the actual text of the bill, although he would vote to bring it up for debate. But what Schumer is trying to do here is send a message. He knows very clearly that he does not have enough votes to actually pass this. The reason he's bringing it to the floor again is because Democrats really don't have a lot of avenues at this point to codify Roe v. Wade into law, but they need to be able to show their constituents, their voters especially, that they are doing something to address this issue. You have a very restive Democratic base right now who is a little upset at the party because they haven't been able to do a lot of the things that they wanted to do or said they were going to do because they have such a narrow majority in the Senate. So a lot of the things they wanted to do haven't been able to get passed. So they need to really, rev up their base of supporters. And they know, and looking at our polling too, that this is something that could potentially rally the troops ahead of the midterm elections. So this is a real effort to show that they're doing something on this issue, even though it's likely going to fail. And they also want to draw the contrast, of course, with Republicans and get everybody on record of where they stand on this issue. Now, Republicans do, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins do have a bill that would codify Roe into law. It's a more straightforward bill. It doesn't include some of the provisions that the Democratic bill has, but that is not going to be considered. And so you are not going to see bipartisan support for this bill later this week.
Well, in the meantime, a document is circulating from the NRSC, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, urging GOP candidates to do what exactly on the topic of abortion?
Yeah, this is really interesting and shows that Republicans are trying to navigate all of the politics of this issue, even though this is something that they have been campaigning for decades. We noticed last week on Capitol Hill that Republicans weren't exactly celebrating the news that Roe could potentially be overturned because they know the politics is a little bit tricky. Our polling shows majority support for keeping Roe in place, and even support among some Republicans as well. There's not support for a federal ban on abortions, and there's not support. A majority of Republicans say that they don't support that either. So this messaging really from the NRSC is kind of coaching candidates how to talk about this issue, and they really urge them to be compassionate when they talk about this. It says that they want to be supporting women in difficult circumstances. They want states to be the ones deciding whether and how to legislate on this and to make stricter laws against abortion, even though we know many of these states would ban it outright. And so this is an effort really, or acknowledgement, I should say, that Republicans know this is tricky to navigate. It's really interesting watching how this is playing out on the campaign trail. In the Pennsylvania Senate race, for example, in that Republican primary that's next week, this has become an issue where Republicans are tripping over each other to be more conservative on this issue. But they also know that in the general election, that may not be the case. So getting through a Republican primary right now, they want to be supportive of overturning Roe, but whether in fact they get any blowback from voters in a general election remains to be seen. Interestingly enough, Donald Trump, who is on the campaign trail this weekend, did not talk about this. And that's significant because this could be a legacy-defining moment for him, given that he was he reshaped the court in his presidency. So that's an interesting tell on the politics.
This is also an issue that has triggered protests at the homes of Supreme Court justices. Ed, what's the White House saying about that?
Yeah, they're essentially saying don't get violent about it. While they understand the concern and the resolve that people have and the desire to speak out, the president, through his spokeswoman, Jen Psaki, spokeswoman just until Friday, tweeting out earlier today that the president does not support any kind of violent protest, but, obviously understands why people are concerned and speaking out. There's been concern mostly in conservative or Republican circles in recent days about these protests that you see here that occurred over the weekend outside the suburban Washington homes of Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who lives nearby. Concern that those might get violent or that they were designed to intimidate. Also concern, of course, that both gentlemen have children who still live at home. So you're not only targeting the justices, but potentially intimidating or scaring the children who live there. But those on the other side look at this and say, look, comes with the territory. If you're going to be a Supreme Court justice, it may mean that you draw public ire. But notably, you've seen in recent days a few Supreme Court justices, notably Clarence Thomas last week at a conference in Georgia, saying we're not going to be intimidated by public response, and it's not our job to respond to the public opinion. It's our response to interpret the law. And so undoubtedly the White House is going to continue to get pressed on this, especially if there are broader examples of violent protest or threats against the justices. Remember that the Supreme Court police and other law enforcement agencies are on higher alert and providing more protection to them in the wake of the leak of the Roe ruling a week ago tonight. And there's concern that there could be more political violence across the country in response once the decision is announced, whenever that may be, either later this month or more likely next month. We'll wait and see.
Finally, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton tweeted this morning about the baby formula shortage in the U.S., saying in part the formula shortage is a national crisis, hitting poor moms and kids the hardest. The Biden administration needs to take this seriously. Caitlin, walk us through why this is a political issue now.
Well, it's an urgent issue for parents like me who are feeding their babies formula right now. And lucky for us, we have another parent in the briefing room, Ed O'Keefe, who asked Jen Psaki about this issue today, about the formula shortage that is really becoming a national crisis. The White House maintains, from Jen Psaki's point of view, that they argue that they are working with manufacturers to increase production, to optimize supply lines and the supply chain, and so they want to show that they're working on it. But this is a serious issue. As you both know, you're both parents. You know that the number one issue for parents is how to feed their children when they're babies, especially. They're at a very vulnerable state. Formula is a really important resource for parents, and especially those with small babies who, until they're 6 months old, they can't have anything else in terms of nutrition. So, you go to, I was just at Target the other day trying to buy baby formula, and the shelves are wiped out. And this is a very significant issue. And you're starting to see pressure applied in terms of government accountability. So it is interesting that Cotton is bringing this up. I think the point that he was making, that this could affect poor families and those who have little options, fewer options. Formula is extremely expensive already. And so if there's a shortage, those who are left out of this equation, should really be the focus here. So this is an issue that we'll see kind of whether and how this can pick up, who is accountable for this shortage. And this also comes as we remember the recall against Abbott, who manufactures brands like Similac, having to issue a recall on formula earlier this year because of a plant in Michigan and some cases of infant deaths. And this is a situation where it has been reported that the FDA was warned months ahead of time. A lot of accountability here, a lot of questions about the supply chain, and a very urgent need for families right now.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Ed O'Keefe, thank you both.